Didn't see each other and we were muted. Was a conversation
Exactly.
happening? That's the existential question of the digital future.
We got it
Well,
up
like,
and working.
if a robocall leaves a message on my answering machine, was there a conversation is what I want to know. Or my voicemail, I shouldn't say answering machine, that dates me.
Oh, wow, Mr. Russ, answering machine.
Every now and then I dig back and I pull out one of those and my kids look at me and raise their eyebrows and I go, sorry.
Like that, no. All right, well, thank you so much, Mr. Russ. You are now pushed, okay?
Thanks, Lina.
Bye-bye.
Good morning, 131 362 131 362 36277. That's a lot of digits. I think it's 313 must be the phone number. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Hi, Andrea. You're muted, but I got the hi, Russ.
Hi. Nice to see you.
Good to see you. We've got Gladys and Terry and A. Arnold so far. Good morning, Cindy. How are you? Good to see everyone bright and early Monday morning. Depends on where you are, I suppose, how bright and early it is. I'm in the East Coast, so.
Russ,
Yes.
this is Viola. I'm the 313 phone number.
Hi, Viola. You want me to change
Hi.
rename you?
Well, you can, but two things happened. I think I took this class last week,
Okay.
and somehow I was looking to book something else instead of this class. So
You're welcome to stay. You're also welcome to go. I have some new material this week, so it won't be exactly the same as last week.
yeah, I was going to say I'll probably stay for a while because I double booked myself even for another meeting at my church. We got a meeting shortly, so I will stay on for a while. I know I can always pick something up, even if it's something just from last week. So I did want to say I'm here. I'm just on a different avenue. I'm on 313.
Super, Viola. Glad to have you here again.
Thank you.
If anyone is able, it'd be nice if they would put in the chat where they're from. Then we see where everyone in the class is from this morning.
I'm from Michigan, Viola.
Where in Michigan? That's a big state.
I am about 20-some miles north of Detroit, Berkeley, Southfield, Lathrop Village area.
Very good. Well, it's good to have. We always have a lot of Michiganders in our classes because Michigan was one of the first states to sign on with Get Set Up. So, good morning, Pat.
Yeah, the governor really pushes it.
Yep. I'm going to rename you just for the heck of it. I accidentally muted you. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that, Viola. I meant to rename you. So, the Viola. Gladys is from Houston. And anyone else wants to put in the chat where they're from this morning, and we can know where each other's from. We've got Mia and Meg and Gloria, and we have someone who is SU. You are welcome to rename yourself unless you want to be known as SU. And Andrea and Terry and Cindy so far. And Mia's from Texas, Meg is from Detroit, so you're from near Viola. And Andrea's from Philadelphia. Oh, and also Pat is from Michigan. We got a lot of folks from Michigan here this morning. Cindy's from Tucson. You're up early, Cindy. Glad to have you all here. We're also live on Get Set Up TV this morning. We'll give it about 1 more minute and then we'll go ahead and start. Glad to have all of you with us on Monday morning. It's going to be a fabulous day where I am. So I'm going to be outside soon working. I might even do my 3:30 class outside. We'll see if I can get the background set up and it's not too windy. I have a nice umbrella over a deck table. And if it's not windy, I can put the umbrella down and get it shaded a bit so I am not seeing too much sun. Let's see. Doreen Roberts. Welcome, Doreen. I bet there's a lot of people here today that are thinking they'd like to go travel somewhere. If you're thinking you want to travel, raise your hand. And since most of you aren't on the screen, you're going to have to raise a virtual hand. It's okay. There we go. Andrea's got she's got her hand raised. Thank you. Yep. I'm seeing lots of virtual hands being raised about people that want to travel. I might do a class in a few weeks about where you can travel in the world or in the US if you want. So the list, believe it or not, is growing every week and every day. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll give the class a start. Pat says she has the nomad gene. I think we're related. I have it too. So let me
I'm leaving Saturday for Mexico for 3 weeks. I hope, pray I'll be safe.
Oh, I think you will be. I'd like to go to Mexico. Actually, my son-in-law's from Mexico. My daughter and he are going there soon for a long weekend. And they're going back in July and we're going down with them at the end of the year. So I'm looking forward to going to Mexico. In fact, I'm doing a class on the foods of Oaxaca coming up in end of next week. In fact, I'm going to do several classes on Mexico, travel to Mexico, because it's a place that you can go. And it's a beautiful place. And it's very accessible for people from the US. It's one of the easiest places for us to get to. And there's plenty of places that are safe to go. Welcome, everybody. This morning, we're talking about slow travel. Spend less, but have a richer experience. Hi, Eva. Welcome. Glad to see you. Lots of familiar names and faces here this morning. This, by the way, is a typical scene in an Irish pub. If you go into an Irish pub or a restaurant in the evening for a meal, there's often a group playing. So this was a little group playing some traditional Irish music when we were there 6 years ago. I'm your guide, Russ Eanes. I'm from Harrisonburg, Virginia. I'm a writer, a walker, and a cyclist. I formerly was a book publisher, and in that role, I love to help authors shape their ideas into a book. I now am a full-time guide with Get Set Up, and I love the energy I get and the wisdom I collect from working with older adults, from all of you. So these are great classes, and I have a lot of fun as a guide. Get Set Up helps you learn useful skills from people like you so you can do wonderful things. We learn from each other. Ideally, we can see you and your cameras are on. You can request a recording of this class after the class. You email help@getsetup.io. And if anybody's joining by live stream, and we are live streaming today, the best way to participate is to join us and register for a class. And by the way, Get Set Up's not paid to promote any specific products. We're just an educational organization. Our agenda today, we're going to do a quick or short definition of what I call slow travel. We're going to list and discuss some of the elements of what I call slow travel. We'll talk a little bit about hopes for the future of travel, and we'll share about some of our experiences that different ones of you may have had in slow travel. I love it when you share with others some of these experiences like the ones I'm talking about. Well, I have a definition of slow travel. I sure didn't invent the term, not even sure where I picked it up exactly, but I have my own definition. And I say that slow travel is an experience, not a consumer item. It means immersing in a culture, learning its cuisine, customs, history, and whatever else makes it unique. It means having a sense of wonder and being open to whatever comes along. That's, for me, slow travel means you slow down. And ironically, or not ironically, or maybe coincidentally, slow travel, if you take it the right way, also costs you less. So you end up having a richer experience and spending a little bit less money. So let's talk about some of the things that I suggest are good elements of slow travel. Well, number one is to live like a local. And when you live like a local, I suggest that you rent an apartment or a room. Nothing the matter with a hotel or a B&B or anything like that. I've stayed in lots of them. I can recommend plenty. But one of the things my wife and I have enjoyed doing, particularly over about the last 5 years, is renting an apartment or a room in a town. Might be on the countryside, might be near a city, doesn't matter, depends on what it is we want to see. But we like to rent that apartment or room and feel like we're part of the neighborhood. The place we're looking at here is actually in the north of Edinburgh in Scotland. And it was just a little town of Aberdour, and it was within an easy a bus ride of downtown Edinburgh. It was about a half an hour, but we loved walking over to the bus and then looking at the scenery on the ride into the middle of the city. We did no hassles with traffic or anything like that if we'd been driving a car. And we got to just walk around the neighborhood like we were one of the people. And we just liked seeing how the people lived, what they did, what their gardens were like, what kind of flowers they grew. Gave us a great sense of what it means to live in that part of Scotland. Living like a local can also mean making your own meals. This is actually a delicious looking meal that my wife and I made ourselves in that guest apartment that I showed you. We like to go to the grocery store, which is one of the third things we'll talk about in a minute, and get our own food and bring it back. And we like to rent a place that has a few cooking facilities, so you can make some coffee and then just go to the store and buy food and make it yourself. It's less expensive. It's basically what you'd be doing at home, buying your own food and preparing it. Nothing against going out to eat. We often, actually, when we go out to eat, when we were traveling, we do often eat out once a day. We sometimes eat the midday meal or an evening meal. That doesn't preclude us from going to a pub or a local inn or place where the locals hang out. We'll be talking about that. But, you can make a lot of your own meals. We often will make a picnic lunch. We'll have breakfast in, and we'll make a picnic lunch for ourselves to take along while we're out during the day. So living like a local can mean renting an apartment room, making your own meals, and shopping in the local grocery store. So one thing my wife and I love to do is go into a grocery store in another country. Could be Scotland, could be England, could be France, Switzerland, Germany, Spain, just a different country. How do the locals shop? What do their grocery stores look like? My wife loved this place. I think this is an Aldi's, and it might be in Germany. And they have like a whole chocolate section of the store. Like that's one of the major food groups in Germany is chocolate. So we got a picture of it, but we just love, what do their grocery stores look like? I've loved doing that ever since I've traveled. I mean, even when I was a little kid and we would go on vacation somewhere for 2 weeks, I would love going into the grocery store, into the beach town or wherever it was we were staying with our family. What was their grocery store like? Like how was it different than our grocery store at home? So that's just that you get to learn a bit of the culture, immerse yourself by being in the neighborhood, making your own meals, and shopping in the local grocery store. Another aspect of slow travel is getting to know the locals and go where they go. So this is an interesting place. This is an old food market in Madrid. And in 2018, I walked 500 miles across Spain on the Camino de Santiago, and my wife joined me the last week. And when we were done, we flew home through Madrid, but we had an extra afternoon and evening in Madrid. So we decided to go out and look for something to eat. And we, of course, hopped the metro down into this. We were staying near the airport. We hopped the metro and went down into the center of the city, and we found the Central Plaza, and there were lots of restaurants there, and there were plenty of tourists, and we were hungry, so we sat down and ate. But then we started walking the city, and we came across this place, an old market, and discovered this was where the locals were going to eat. And we went inside, and it was essentially food stalls, and a lot of them had tapas. If you've been to Spain, you know that the Spaniards love to have little appetizers with a drink. And in fact, they might do that early in the evening and then go out to eat like 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night and have a bigger meal. But you can make a meal out of tapas if you want to. And we went in there and the vibe was fabulous. And that's where all the locals were. And we said, we wish we discovered this before we had our meal, because we could have hung out with the locals and talked, maybe not talk with them if they spoke English. My wife is pretty good Spanish, but we might have met some people, but we would have had the vibe of the local place. And you get a sense of what Madrid is like in the evenings. So we've done this wherever we've gone. We like to go. When we were in Ireland in 2015, we were staying in the town of Kenmare, and we went to a restaurant for supper, and there was some musicians there. And somebody gave us a tip that if we went to this certain pub around 10 o'clock, all the local musicians who'd been playing in the restaurants for the tourists, that's where they went after they were done to hang out and play together. So we went in there and we got treated to a lot of local musicians playing music, just jamming with each other, having a pint. In fact, they handed me a guitar at one point to play something. It was one of the best parts of our experiences. So you have to, and we were staying at a B&B that time, and the B&B owners tipped us off to that pub. So go get to know the locals and go where they go. Another key aspect of slow travel for me is walking, biking, or taking local transits, which could be subways, buses, trains. And it's usually less expensive. And you can spend your time. I mean, I've driven in Ireland and England and France and different places, but when you're driving, it's hard. It's kind of hard sometimes to take in the scenery. You can see wider scapes in different places if you stop, and you can get out and do exploring. But in Europe in particular, there is local transit to just about everything. And actually, this is a train in Newcastle. My son and I went to England, my youngest son, in 2012, and we were staying in York, and we decided we wanted to go hike Hadrian's Wall. And Hadrian's Wall was, about 50, 60 miles away. We hopped on a local train that ran us up to Newcastle. That took us about 40 minutes. Then, that was the faster train. Then we got on a local train that took us out to a town of Hexham. And then at Hexham, we got on a bus that took us out into the middle of the countryside. And that's one of the things that you learn when you're in other countries, is that often buses run into rural areas. And so that bus basically dropped us off at Hadrian's Wall, which is really out kind of in the middle of nowhere. I mean, there really aren't too many towns along the wall. They're often a couple kilometers away from the wall now. But my wife and I did the same thing when we were in Germany. I used to go there for work in 2016 as well. We wanted to go to a small town and then out in the countryside to a winery that was in an old monastery. And we took the train over to that small town, got off and I'd already done my research, and I found out that there was a bus that ran out to that winery in the monastery several miles out into the countryside and dropped us off, picked us up. So that's something very different. In the US, where I live, the buses only run in the city of Harrisonburg. They don't run out into the countryside. And there's miles and miles of countryside around here. It's kind of a shame that the people who live in the countryside have to have a car. I suppose they could have a bike or walk if they chose to, but that'd be a long way to go if they want to get anywhere. But that's something very different in other countries, in particular Europe. And I've learned it's not that hard to master the local transit schedules. You can find them online. You can also find them at the stations. Stations have good maps of their transit. In London, they have a great thing where if you're at a bus stop, it'll tell you which bus is about to come. And you just have to look at your schedule and your map to figure out where that bus is running to. In fact, one of our favorite things to do for my wife and me, and this is when I've been in London, is the tube is a fast way to get from one place to another. And I certainly can recommend the tube. But if you have a little more time and you haven't got that far to go, hop on a local bus. And these big double-decker buses, you climb in and get up to the front of the bus. On the top, the big glass bubble, you can see the whole town. And it's a great way to sort of tour the town by bus while you're going from one place to another, maybe going back to where you're staying. So I can really recommend local transit. You can also do a lot of walking, and my wife and I have done lots of walking in cities. Many cities in Europe also have bike share. If you don't have a bike yourself, or the place you're staying doesn't have a bike, to get longer distances. So I personally, that's the way I like to travel when I'm in other cities. I generally avoid renting a car if I can, unless there's somewhere specific out in the countryside I have to get to. Anybody got any comments about anything I've talked about so far, about renting an apartment, living in a local neighborhood, taking local transit? Anybody got a comment?
I have a
Yes.
question. How do you get these apartments? How long do you stay? That's probably my question. You get the apartment. We've done that in France, but we used to stay for 2 weeks in the same place. How long are you staying in these places?
Many times a week or less, even. Airbnb is a good option. And actually, in our class where we talk, I have a class about using online and mobile apps to plan travel. There's a section where we're talking about Airbnb. In fact, we might even do a whole class about Airbnb. There's two sides to it, and I recognize that. There are many cities in the world where Airbnb has made local housing options difficult for people. I certainly feel for that, but there are a few other options of places you can stay. About guest apartments. Airbnb is how my wife and I have found most of them, but booking.com actually also has a lot of guest apartments. And when I was in Spain in 2018, when I walked the Camino de Santiago, we actually found lots of guest apartments in Santiago on booking.com. And it was really nice after having walked for 5 weeks across Spain, and stayed every night in a different albergue, kind of in a bunk style in a dormitory. We decided it was nice to have a guest apartment with just the two of us that had cooking facilities and laundry facilities. It was kind of nice after that long walk to experience that. So we found that on booking.com. And even in the US, I know you can find them at booking.com. And sometimes the week rates are less than the nightly rates. So Pat, did you have something you wanted to share about that?
Just basically, I was a flight attendant for many years, and I would always leave a note in the hotel room where I was, what bus line I was taking to go to a certain area, and just in case something happened. And that's a good tip if you're traveling alone or just a couple, just kind of leave an agenda for the day in the room. And I would come back always and laugh and say, oh, why did this is stupid to do, but it's a good habit to be in, because you're
That's
going
a very
into
good tip.
places and things you don't know. And being a single woman, I was always a little apprehensive sometimes about taking off on my own and going, but it really was a sense of comfort. So if I did disappear, they could track my steps and say, hey, did you see this woman, or whatever.
Yeah, that's a great tip. By the way, Pat, 2:30 Wednesday, we're doing a class on solo travel.
I saw that. I don't know. I have some commitments and I'm leaving out of town at the end of the week, so I have lots to do, but I have that on my, if I have time.
No problem at all. No problem at all. But I love a lot of our folks here have a lot of experience traveling solo. So I always invite anyone to come to that class because we'll be doing the class in the future, and I'll say, hey, if any of you want to come, it's a panel discussion this week, and I'm always looking for people for future panels. Sylvia, did you have a comment?
Yes. My late husband and I have been traveling for more than 40 years, and and the main concern, even then, or maybe now even more, is safety. We always prefer to travel by ourselves, but generally we will take a tour with a group for like covering several countries or several places, just to get an eye view, and then determine where we would like to travel by ourselves. That's the only time you can stop and to smell the roses or whatever. But the main concern is safety. And I was wondering what you find is a reliable source. I don't know if there's a comprehensive, reliable source, but we usually checked out right to the tourist bureau in the country or the place we're about to visit. It takes a lot of work, but recently I haven't done that, and I'm doing solo traveling now after my husband passed away. So that is my primary concern. But even then, since at least 30 years ago, in some countries, I don't want to mention them, they had a professional pickpocket schools. Small children, pregnant women, all that people that you would have sympathized with when they ask you for help. They're the main culprits. So I wonder if you have some information, current information about that. I'm really now waiting for the airlines to be really dependable when they say they socially distance, because I've had some friends who after they got up, they found out they were within 1 or 2 feet of the other passengers.
Yeah. Well, to come back about the question of traveling safely, actually next week we are scheduling, there will be a class about how to travel safely. And also we'll be talking a little bit about that in our traveling solo class on Wednesday, 2:30. So I check that class out. You might find some tips from experienced folks about how to travel safely. And I also understand that as a man, I perceive that differently than women do. Definitely true. So that's why I like to have women come in who know their tips for how to travel safely. There are a whole bunch of ways to do that, and I don't have a time today's class to go to them in great depth, but I will say that there something like TripAdvisor or either even Facebook groups dedicated to certain types of travel, and getting on those groups or on TripAdvisor, they'll give you advice about certain areas of a city or town or place that might be safer or less safe to go into, or tips about how to keep yourself safe while you're traveling. So if you're solo, one nice way to help yourself in that venture is to use social media or online forums to get to know others. And my wife and I've done that too. So very good. I'm going to mention a comment here from Andrea. Thanks, Sylvia, for commenting and raising your question. Andrea says she loves bringing souvenirs home from supermarkets, like fancy canned fish from Portugal or espresso from Italy. Andrea, we do the same thing. We actually, for a couple of years, did all our Christmas shopping overseas, bringing home little things that were souvenirs, simple stuff like that, goodies from other countries for our kids or grandkids. So toys, Christmas ornaments, anything. That's a great thing. And the stuff that's common in their supermarkets seems very special to us. And of course, when my wife and I and daughter we were in France in 2013, and we drove from Strasbourg to Paris, which, by the way, was a mistake. I wish I'd taken a high-speed train. Would have had more time in Paris. But one advantage was we were able to stop in a region, and I don't remember where it was. It was about an hour from Paris, where there were some local cheeses that were great. I mean, the kind of cheeses you would have spent $8 or $10 on in the U.S. were like €1 in this town, because that was just the local thing, and for us in the U.S. it'd be a special thing. So that's a great Great suggestion. Let me just keep on going here a little bit. Some things. So we've talked about some living local and using transit or foot. Another tip I have that I suggest to people, this also would be just a travel tip, but is an important aspect of slow travel, is learn the local market days in cities or towns. In Europe especially, but not just Europe, also in Latin America and other places. I mean, sometimes there are markets every day. There are places that are just local streets that are markets. But in Europe, for example, there's often a central plaza or some other side plaza where there's a market, and these sometimes rotate. So this market I'm showing you here was in the city of Mainz, which is on the Rhine River in Germany. And I went to Germany several times for the Frankfurt Book Fair. And Frankfurt is about 20 minutes by train from Mainz. So I would always hop over to Mainz because the day after I got there was always market day in Mainz. And I loved the market in Mainz. It's huge, it's a very big central plaza. Everything you could imagine was for sale there, from, fresh fruits and vegetables to take home to wines, because it's the wine region. And or just toys or other handicrafts were for sale in the markets, because it wasn't just, this is where the locals shopped. There were tourists there, but what there were also was packed with locals from the city and from the region. So I always, when as part of my research, when I'm going somewhere ahead of time, is I find out which day is the market, because if I can be there for that market that day, I will make sure I get in there. And when my wife and I were in Italy in 2019, it's actually the last time I've been on an airplane was 2019. We were in Rome for 3 days, and the last afternoon we were there, we found one of the local markets. In other words, there was a whole lot of markets in certain plazas in Rome, and we just looked for one that was open on a Sunday, and we found it. We walked over to it. Actually, what the souvenir, the thing we brought home for family for Christmas that year, were big bags of Italian spices. Another way to travel slowly and to also less expensively is take a city tour. They're often free. I'm actually doing a class on that this Friday at 11 o'clock about taking a free city tour. This is a tour we took in the city of York. In 2016, we went to York, and then we also went to Munich. And both places we found out from our hosts. We were staying in a guest apartment, actually a guest room in a house, in a guest house in York that had cooking facilities. And we asked him all sorts of stuff. And he said, if you go down to such and such a place tomorrow at 11:30, there's always a free local tour. It's about a 2-hour tour, maybe 2.5. But you'll learn a lot of stuff you wouldn't learn in the tour books, the guidebooks, or you'd find stuff that you'd be paying for in another tour, but it's free. Now, we always give our tour guides a tip at the end. I think that's what you should do. But the nice thing is it is free. So if you decided you didn't want a tip, you could. And we've done other kind of tours besides city tours. When we were in Ireland, we had a local guy take a group of us on a walk to the cliffs of Moher. So we actually were about 8 kilometers from the cliffs in the town of, I forgot the name of the town, but anyway, we were in a town about 8 kilometers from the cliffs, and we walked all the way along there and arrived at the cliffs at the very end. And he told us all about the history of the area, and he'd grown up there and he had a farm there. So we learned, and then we got to the cliffs, and there were just tour buses, with people pouring off the tour buses and going to the edge and looking at the cliffs. And that was their tour. Then they hopped back on the bus. We had a chance to walk there. And a local told us all about what it meant to grow up in the area, about the history of the area. And that was a free tour. We gave him a tip. Didn't charge, but we gave him a nice tip at the end for his time. And we had a nice sized group. I've done coffee tours of organic coffee farms in Colombia. Again, free. These things are all fabulous. And that's how you learn about the culture, maybe the history, everything you can about a region. So I recommend these kind of free city tours that you can take. Yes, and Pat says, be aware of your customs and agriculture rules of your country when bringing meats and other foods home. Definitely. Think very carefully about what you bring when you come home. And take other tours that give a local flavor. You know, my oldest son and I were in Scotland in 2017, and he wanted to take it. Scotland is really big for whiskey, Scotch whiskey. And this is actually a scene from, we took a tour to a whiskey distillery, and they showed us everything about how they brought the grain in and they made it into mash, and they put it in these big vats where it cooked, and then they showed us how they distilled it. And the guy here is showing us the various elements of what you put in whiskey, the different types of yeasts and grains. And also in this top center here, right here, this little thing is actually peat, chunks of peat, because they heat it with peat, and that gives a certain flavor to the whiskey. I never would have known why Scotch was a big deal. I actually don't drink liquor much. I mean, I have more a pint of beer or a glass of wine, but I learned why Scotch whiskey is unique. And what makes it unique is the water comes out of the mountains from glacial runoff, and there's a certain and it comes out of springs in the mountainsides, and because of the geology of the type of stone and rock, the water has a unique taste to it, kind of a unique chemistry, and that's what makes Scotch so special. And actually, later I went to Edinburgh with my wife, and I went on there's a Scotch museum, and they can take you, and then they described all the different Scotch regions, whiskey regions of Scotland, and how they taste different, and explained it all, how each one was a little bit different, and why the whiskey culture of that place. But I learned something about the unique insight to that culture, that place, and that to me, that's slow travel. And these tours are available, and you can find them in guidebooks. You can find them online. And then I always say, learn about the history of the area you're going to, even if it's just a little bit of history before you go. And then while you're there, learn some history. That's the Irish flag. And the place that we're at right now, this sort of nondescript looking spot, is actually a very famous spot for the Irish Republic. This is in the Kilmainham prison. And my sister went with my wife and me to Ireland in 2015. And she read up ahead of it in time. And she said, we need to go out to the Kilmainham prison for a tour. Why? Well, the Kilmainham prison is where the British housed, imprisoned, I shouldn't say housed, imprisoned all the Irish rebels for 2 centuries. So whether it was the late 1700s or late 1600s into the early 1900s, that's where they imprisoned them. And in 1916, there was a rebellion, an uprising in Dublin, where they declared a republic and attempted to drive the British out. Didn't succeed. After about a few days, the leaders of the rebellion surrendered, and 7 or 8 of them were executed within a few weeks. And this is the wall where they executed them with a firing squad. Well, the local populace wasn't behind the rebels at the beginning, but after they started executing them so quickly, that changed the sentiment 180 degrees, and the British stopped executing, and they eventually released a lot of the leaders because of the public outcry against the execution. And this is the wall where they were shot. This is the place where they executed. And so our tour guide was explaining to us the significance of this wall, and a plaque with all the names of the men who've been executed. They walked us through the prison, a very, very bleak looking place, not somewhere I would have wanted to spend any time. And they've kind of kept it in that bleak condition. And you can see the names of some of the prisoners, Michael Collins and others that were held in that prison. They wrote their name outside the cell where they stayed. So we spent a lot of time. We just enjoyed learning about the history of Ireland, and it gives you a sense of the history. I mean, of the people and what it means to them. Little note about Ireland. My wife's Irish, Jane Fitzgerald. I'm part Irish. And we always knew that a lot of Americans have some Irish ancestry. But when we were in Ireland, we discovered that many, many more Irish have American family. And they'll tell you, oh, yeah, my mother's great uncle emigrated to America and such, or my cousin went, a few years ago. The Irish love Americans, by the way, because so many of their Irish emigrated to America, and they have relatives, even if they're distant, even if they're fifth cousins in America, they know it. Here's a unique thing that we kind of got into, not thinking too clearly about me when I made my plans to go to. I went to. I spent 3 weeks in Scotland and England in 2016, and part of that I'm going to tell about today at 3:30. If you want to hear about my pilgrimage to Iona and Lindisfarne, but we happened to be there over the time of the Brexit vote. And so before the vote happened, I would often ask locals if I was in a pub or a restaurant or a B&B or a guest, my host, what do you think about Brexit? What's going to happen? And they would give us their opinions and how they were going to vote. Well, we happened to be there. We were in St. Andrews. We were in Scotland and then drove up to St. Andrews the day of the Brexit vote. And that evening we sat down actually with our host. We were in an Airbnb and she was explaining, she turned on the TV and she told us how to find they were watching the election results. And the next day, these were the newspapers. So I picked up a couple of newspapers to bring home. It was a big deal, what was happening in Brexit. But I got a very different picture of what it meant by being there and talking to the people about it than I did just listening to the American press, both before and after I came home. And here was a fun thing. Okay, so this is Brexit. So we kind of experienced that tectonic shift in British politics because we were there. We didn't go there for the Brexit, but we happened to be there because of the Brexit. And you never know who you're going to meet. We were in St. Andrews the day of the Brexit vote. It was the graduation day. And a person who was somewhat famous then, I guess he's more famous now, was on the street when I stepped out of a bakery to get a treat for myself. There was Boris Johnson. I think one of his kids was graduating from the University of St. Andrews that day because he's not from Scotland and St. Andrews. So you never know who you might meet just by walking around and being a local. Lastly, what I say about slow travel is give yourself enough time and remember you can't do it all. I don't like to rush at all in life, and I especially like to not rush when I travel. And one of my top 10 travel tips that I'll give in a class that should be next week is give yourself time, give yourself some margin. Don't rush. Give yourself enough time that, like, if you're traveling abroad or even somewhere in the US, I always take extra time in the hotel room, look over everything. I step out in the hallway and then I go back in the room and I give it a once over. Or if you're just planning to go somewhere for the day, you check the local transit schedule, get there a couple minutes early. And most importantly, just remember you can't do everything. Enjoy the experiences that you have, appreciate them for what they are, and savor them when you are done with them. When you come back, hopefully you have photographs or video and other souvenirs to remind you of those things. I'm just going to mention here, we'll end the share here in a second so I can come back and see everybody. Some upcoming related classes. There is a class this week on traveling solo. That is Wednesday at 2:30. I'll make sure in your class notes you get a reference to that class. It's filling up. So if you want to get in, you might want to register for that class today. That is a panel discussion. We got 3 experienced learners who are also three learners like yourself who are also experienced travelers who've traveled quite a bit solo and can share what they've learned from that experience. This afternoon, take a free city tour. I mentioned that. That's 11 o'clock on Friday morning. These are all Eastern Daylight Times. And then I am doing a class 3:30 today about my pilgrimage to Lindisfarne and Iona. And then, of course, this is our last week of the Rick Steves. We're doing something every evening, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday evening. 7:30 island hopping is tonight's topic. And then Thursday and Friday afternoon, we have a few sessions. So keep an eye out for those. Well, let me ask, who's got a slow travel experience that they'd like to share, or a tip, or anything, questions about anything that I was talking to you about this morning?
I have a tip. When you travel by train, always go to the tourist information in the train station, because they are locals and they know their areas and they can even give you ideas of what's going on in that town.
That's a very good idea. And that's one of the things that I have in my top 10 tips is learn where the tourist information office is. Exactly as she said, they'll, as Jutta said, they'll not only give you ideas of the local places to go, but they can also tell you about tours. Janice.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I just wanted to go back to what exactly do you mean by slow travel?
Yes. So I like to think of slow travel as travel that where we savor and immerse ourselves in the experience versus making it a consumer. A lot of us, and I can be guilty of this too, can see travel as just a consumer experience. I want to go here, I want to go there, I want to have a bucket list, I want to knock this off, I want to get a picture there, I want to get a picture of this spot. And I think a slow travel is a way to immerse ourselves in a culture and learn from the culture, the history, and in a sense, kind of become like a local for the time you're there and get to know the locals, find out where they shop, where they hang out, what their recommendations are for things to see. So it's literally slowing down because you're often walking, biking, taking local transit, which is slower. But also you're inwardly slower because you're trying to learn, experience the wonder of the place.
Thank you.
You're welcome. More questions. Go ahead. I appreciate any comments or.
Sorry to interrupt. I would like to know about the booking of these things. I was in travel for 20 years, but Americans aren't into this sort of thing normally. So I have no experience on booking the Airbnb and all those. You said you were going to do a class. Can you tell me about that?
Yes, there's a class called using online and online sites and mobile sites for travel. And we'll probably even break that class up and do one just on how to book a Airbnb or a booking.com. These are very commonly used services. The two I use the most are Airbnb and booking.com, but there are others. They have their pluses and minuses.
I mean, are you going to explain on the class how you rate these? I mean, the only thing with going to a hotel, I mean, you know what you're going to get basically. On an Airbnb, it makes me a little nervous on what you're going to get. Is it clean, etc. Do they rate these things, and do you explain that in the class, etc.?
I do. We in the class on mobile devices, we mention it briefly, but when I come into the using social media, Airbnb, and other places to actually book things, we'll explain it a little bit more in depth. Airbnb has its risks. I've had my better and my worst experiences with Airbnb. My only bad experiences I've ever had relate to how comfortable the bed was. I've never had a dishonest or difficult host. I've had some very good experiences where I've really come to appreciate and enjoy the host. I've had hosts go the extra mile for me. Usually you can find these in the comments. You have to look at the comments carefully. People tend to not want to leave negative comments, so try to read between the lines what's being said. But they give you a chance to get to know one another. Also, I use, as I mentioned before, I'm in parts of various travel forum groups and Facebook groups where they do discuss such things, which is TripAdvisor can be that way. I've been hearing lately some caution about TripAdvisor for lodging and other things, because sometimes the ratings can be kind of rigged.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
to speak.
How do you get on? I mean, the easiest way is recommendation from someone else.
Yes.
So how do you get onto these social media? Say I wanted to go in France. I used to travel through France a lot, and we'd just stop at a local village and say, okay, we're going to go to there. We'd walk up, see the room, look at the sheets and say, yes, we'll stay. But in doing it this way from America, you cannot do that. So you need to get onto that social media to do it.
Well, and the way you described it can still be done. There's actually nothing the matter with that. And as we mentioned, we've had better and worse experiences in booking our own places. Some other bits of advice. I mean, I could give lots today, but another bits of advice would be aware of any language barriers that you might have. When my wife and I were in Italy in 2019, we discovered that not a lot of Italians know English. My wife's pretty fluent in Spanish, so we kind of limped along, and I learned a few bits of Italian here and there, only enough to get me by in a pinch. But that's something to look out for. Does your host or the place where you're staying use English, or unless you don't know the other language? I'm going to come to two more questions. There's a couple comments and questions from Sylvia and from Janice. And before I do that, I've got a comment from Andrea. She says, I love people watching in a place like Paris or Rome, parking at an outdoor cafe table for an hour. I feel like I learned so much about fashion, communication styles, and the routines of place and its people. And I agree with you 100%, Andrea. That is one of my favorite things to do. And to make that experience even better, get off the beaten track of the tourists. We learned when we were in Paris in 2013 that we were staying on the left bank in the old Latin Quarter, if we walked up Rue Saint-Germain about, I guess, a quarter mile, and we suddenly discovered we were where all the locals were, and that was the place to stop in the cafe and sit for an hour. Very good suggestion. Sylvia, you had a comment or question.
Yes. I was going to say, check it out. Some countries have, I know we were in some, but I can't remember, a whole day's river cruise on your birthday. And in countries like Switzerland and Germany, in Germany, it's just, we were there for off and on about 4 years or more. If you just, we didn't have to check these booking agencies. We just go to a city or a place and look for Zimmer frei, Zimmer, that's room, frei, free. And they have always turned out to be so good. They're dependable and clean. We had, in all those years, we never found one that was not. And again, certain countries, I wouldn't say, you would want to double check and do it through a booking agency. But that's all I have right now.
Very good suggestion. Thanks, Sylvia. Janice, did you have your hand up by accident? Did you have another comment?
Oh, I had not taken it down, so I just took it down. The only
no problem at all. Well, I really enjoyed this class. You all are a great group, and I hope to see some of you in some of the other travel classes we have this week. Check out the schedule. If you go to the website and you put in the search bar my name, you'll see all the travel classes that I'm doing. So that's how you can find them all at once.
I guess I do have one question, and I'm sorry.
Yes, Janice. That's okay.
The traveling solo that you mentioned, you said that's going to be a panel discussion?
Yes. Yes. So what I did was, I'm an experienced solo traveler, though I prefer to travel with my wife, but I've traveled a lot by myself as well. And partly for my work and for other reasons. And I'm aware that it's very different for a man than it is for a woman. And so this is a great panel. We've got all older travelers. So they're all in our age group, over 60. And they're all very experienced in traveling by themselves. 2 men, two women and 1 man. So they each give their different perspective, and they've got some varied places in the world they've traveled to. So they can also give you a perspective on that. One of our panelists, Regina, spent I think a month in Taipei, and she planned the whole trip by herself. So she'll tell a little bit about that, about traveling solo. So it's going to be a great class, but it will be repeated, probably not necessarily with a panel discussion every time, but I like to open up this kind of topic with a panel discussion because they can give some different perspectives and I can gather those in for future classes. So please come and join us if you're thinking of doing some solo travel.
Oh, I typically travel solo, definitely at this point in life, and have actually lived in other countries. So I found it's easier to get up and go than having to wait and coordinate with other people.
Yes, very good point. Very good point. Well, thanks for sharing that, Janice. I hope we see you in one of those classes. Thanks, everybody, for being with us this morning. And I hope to see you in another class. And if not, or until then, have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Oh, by the
Thank
way,
you.
what time is the panel discussion on Wednesday, the 28th?
2:30 Eastern Daylight Time.
2:30. Oh, Eastern.
Eastern.
I
Thank
can't
you.
find, sorry. I can't find that mobile app travel one. Can you tell me when that is?
It's probably not on the schedule yet. So today they usually put out the schedule for classes a week from now. So just keep an eye out for it, Doreen.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very
You're
much.
welcome.
That's great.
Thank you,
Thank
Russ.
you.
Very nice class, very informative.